Mavis sometimes likes to go up the line beyond the quarry. When she does, she sees something new every day. One of these things was Thomas. "Who are you?" "I'm Thomas. Who are you?" "I'm Mavis. I work at the quarry," she said proudly. "I can tell," said Thomas, eyeing her dirty paint. "I run this branch line. It's very hard work." "Working at the quarry is hard work too," Mavis put in. "I never get a rest. You shiny engines look like you aren't worth the hard work. You could never do anything like me. Good day." And with that, Mavis left a very furious Thomas behind. "That Mavis," he huffed at the junction. "She's so stuck up." "She's not stuck up," replied Toby. "She just likes to feel important. She never gets her chance when she's at the quarry." "But still," Thomas protested, "she should show more kindness." "Could never do anything like her. I'll show her. I could pull her cars in record time." "Why don't you?" Toby suggested brightly. "You could show her a thing or two about running branch lines properly." "Maybe I will," Thomas huffed and snorted away. And so it was arranged. Mavis met Thomas at the quarry. "You'll be pulling stone to the harbor," Mavis said. "Pooh, that'll be easy," Thomas snorted. "Oh?" Mavis smirked. "You can pull my part as well then." "I don't think that will be necessary," the manager said. "But you will be double-heading trains to save time. Otherwise we'd be very late, and that would never do." Thomas and Mavis stared. "Get behind me then," Thomas said. "We're going along the tramway, you silly teapot," Mavis snapped. "Do you want to be stopped by an officer?" Thomas was cross, but he knew Mavis was right. "Hurry, hurry," Thomas huffed. "Fusspot," Mavis retorted. They reached the dangerous part of the line that went through the town. Mavis knew to be careful here, but Thomas had never been before and couldn't care less. He pushed against Mavis furiously. A strong bump lurched Mavis forward before she could stop in time. She hit a lorry and it flew to the side of the line. A crowd surrounded Thomas and Mavis, who sat awkwardly and very embarrassed. "You silly engines," the quarry manager snarled. They tried to apologize, but he wouldn't listen. "You'll be staying in the shed until I know what to do with you," he said. "Sir Topham Hatt will hear all about this." He walked away, leaving two very silent engines behind. "Well, well, you really did show Mavis a thing or two about branch lines, didn't you?" Toby said later that evening. Thomas said nothing. "Ah, well," Toby continued, "we live and learn. Never mind you two. I'm sure you'll be allowed to pull stone cars again very soon." Thomas and Mavis hoped they never would.
A mob of excited children poured out of Annie and Clarabelle one morning and raced down to the beach. "They're the Vicar's Sunday School," explained Thomas. "I'm busy this evening, but the station master says I can ask you to take them home." "Of course I will," promised Percy. The children had a lovely day, but at tea time it got very hot. Dark clouds loomed overhead. Then came lightning, thunder, and rain. The children only just managed to reach shelter before the deluge began. Annie and Clarabelle stood at the platform. The children scrambled in. "Can we go home, please, station master?" asked the vicar. The station master called Percy. "Take the children home quickly, please," he ordered. The rain streamed down on Percy's boiler. "Ugh!" he shivered and thought of his nice dry shed. Then he remembered. "A promise is a promise," he told himself. "So, here goes." His driver was anxious. The river was rising fast. It foamed and swirled fiercely, threatening to flood the country any minute. The rain beat in Percy's face. "I wish I could see! I wish I could see!" he complained. They left a cutting and found themselves in water. "Oh, my wheels!" shivered Percy. "It's cold!" But he struggled on. "Whoosh!" he hissed. "It's sloshing my fire!" They stopped and backed the coaches to the cutting. The fireman went to the guard's van carrying a hatchet. "Hello," said the guard. "You look fierce. I want some dry wood for Percy's fire, please. I'll have some of your floorboards," he said. "What, my nice floor?" grumbled the guard. "I only swept it this morning." But he found a hatchet and helped. Soon they had plenty of wood stored in Percy's bunker. His fire burnt well now. He felt warm and comfortable again. "Oh dear," thought Percy sadly. "Harold's come to laugh at me." Boom! Something thudded on Percy's boiler. "Oh!" he exclaimed in a muffled voice. "That's really too bad. He needn't throw things." His driver unwound a parachute from Percy's indignant front. "Harold isn't throwing things at you," he laughed. "He's dropping hot drinks for us." "Beep, beep, thank you, Harold," he whistled. Percy had steam up now. "Come on, let's go." The water lapped his wheels. "Ah!" he shivered. Percy was losing steam, but he plunged bravely on. "I promised," he panted. They piled his fire higher with wood and managed to keep him steaming. He made a last great effort and stood exhausted but triumphant on rails that were clear of the flood. He rested to get steam back, then brought the train home. "3 cheers for Percy," called the vicar, and the children nearly raised the roof. The fat controller arrived in Harold. "Harold told me you were a wizard, Percy. He says he can beat you at some things," Percy snorted, "but not at being a submarine," he chuckled. "I don't know what you've both been playing at, and I won't ask. But I do know that you're a really useful engine." "Oh, sir," whispered Percy happily.
The Fat Controller was refurbishing the big station at the end of the line. To keep delays small, he decided he would need a reliable engine to help with the work, which is why one evening, he arrived at the sheds to find one. That station has been useful for many years, but it's time for it to be repaired. I need an engine to help me with the repairs. There was a brief silence among them until, "Please, sir, I'd like to help." To many surprise, it was Edward who spoke up. "Ha! An old engine like you," James began. "You'd break down before you reached the station." "That I doubt would be the case." Sir Topham Hatt looked back at Edward. "Are you sure you'd be capable of taking on this task?" "With pleasure, but I'm worried if Boko and the others would manage without me," Edward said. "That can be arranged. James can take your place for the branch line. That will be all." And Sir Topham Hatt left. James was left at a loss for words. Edward, on the other hand, was secretly overwhelmed by the huge task ahead, which Thomas could recognize on his face. "You sure you're ready for this?" Edward gave a warm but worried smile. "I helped build Knepford before, so I might as well help repair it." Thomas smiled back, but secretly, he was worried too. The next several days, Edward began the repairs on the big station. They had to be very careful so as not to cause an accident. Edward too found it harder than he first thought. The pliers from the docks needed picking up directly and shunting precisely where the men needed them. Each morning, Thomas would come in with the stone trucks from his branch line to help with the repairs. "You're in quite a rush, Edward." "Needs to be quick work, Thomas," Edward wheezed. "Would you like some help? I'll have enough time before my next train." "I appreciate the offer, but I'm fine. You have a branch line to take care of either way." Thomas wanted to make his argument, but Edward had to be off. "That's my whistle," he said. "Off to collect more beams from the docks." "I'll see you then." Thomas trailed off. When Thomas returned to the sheds, he found he was nowhere to be seen. "Where's Edward?" Thomas asked. "Still working," grunted Gordon, trying to sleep. "I'm getting worried. He seems to be pushed beyond his limit." "Forget Edward. What about me and those rotten twins?" James fumed. "Branch line work is leisurely compared to the work Edward is doing," Thomas shot back. "Shunting is easy work," grunted Gordon. "Never mind about him, little Thomas." "Since when did you know anything about shunting? You three went on strike last time you had to." "Well, whatever the reason," Henry interjected. "Gordon's right. Edward is complacent where he is now. It's best not to get in his way." Thomas felt frustrated at the big engines and fell discontentedly asleep. Edward was once again puffing around to the docks to receive more supplies for the construction. However, he was most tired as ever due to the hard work. Edward came in exhausted, much too worn out to pay proper attention. He hadn't noticed he was rolling down the wrong line, headed right for the scaffolding. "Look out!" called his driver. Edward's eyes bolted open. "Stop! Stop!" Thankfully, no one was hurt. But Edward was in grief. Thomas was quickly on the scene with the cranes and was glad Edward was okay. "I'm sorry, Thomas," Edward winced. "I seem to be over my smoke box." "Don't beat yourself up about it," Thomas comforted. "You only thought it was best." Edward looked glumly down on his buffers. "I know, Thomas, but all I did was create more trouble than I should." "Well, that depends. Are you okay if I lend a buffer? I don't think you would mind if I finish the job while you're gone." Edward could only grin. "Thank you. Then I would gladly appreciate that." The next week, Edward returned home from the works. He was greeted with whistles and cheers and the sight of the big station complete at last. "Welcome back, Edward," bubbled Thomas. "I'm afraid you missed the repairs." "So I see," Edward smiled. "I hope it wasn't much of a hassle." "Oh, don't worry," Thomas smirked. "I've had some help." "And it was miserable," James wheezed angrily. "I had to put up with those troublesome trucks while you were gone." Edward winked at Thomas. "Really, James? I'm amazed you didn't break down before reaching the siding. Then you wouldn't have to work with them at all." And the two blue engines chuckled at their own wit. James wasn't sure, but he felt that both Thomas and Edward had both lost their sense of hard work. But we know they were only teasing, don't we?
While Duncan was away at the works being mended, Rusty the little diesel was assigned to pull Duncan's trains until he returned. Rusty was happy to help out and enjoyed the opportunity to pull more passenger trains compared to the usual goods. One morning, Rusty was waiting at the platform when he saw a smart man in a suit. "Oh, hello, sir," smiled Rusty. "Hello there, young Diesel," he replied. "Who might you be?" "I'm Rusty," the Diesel smiled. "My name is Bernard Holden." "Bernard Holden?" Rusty gasped in surprise. "The Bernard Holden, founder of the Bluebell Heritage Railway in England." "The very same," chuckled Mr. Holden. "It's an honor, sir, but what are you doing here?" asked Rusty. "I'm currently going around Sodor trying to gather donations for the Bluebell Railway to raise enough money so we can save for an engine from scrap. Unfortunately, I still need quite an earning to purchase that engine. Quite a pitchfork." Rusty felt sorry for Mr. Holden. "Wish I could do something to help," he sighed. "I'm sure you can do something. Perhaps try spreading the word to anyone you can." As Rusty trundled down the line, he couldn't stop thinking about Mr. Holden and saving an engine. "There must be something I can do," he thought to himself. That evening, Rusty told the others about Mr. Holden. "Oh dear," began Pearson. "I'm sorry he has to go through such struggle." Even Sir Andrew had to agree. "If only we could do something to help," sighed Rusty. "Well, we're not going to be able to figure something out without a good night's rest," said Kindley. "No, it's best that we go to sleep." Everyone agreed and soon fell asleep. All except Rusty, who stayed up brainstorming ideas. "There must be something I can do," thought to himself. The next morning, an idea flew into Rusty's exhaust.
That's it.
Rusty said, waking up the others.
A charity. That'll make Mr. Holden happy. I must go speak to the thing controller.
Rusty scurried away, and eventually he reached the station to see the thing controller. Sir! Cried Rusty. Oh, hello, Rusty, the thing controller said. May I help you? It's not me you can help, sir. And Rusty explained his idea. By the end, the thing controller was smiling broadly. Now that is a splendid idea. I'll get in contact with Mr. Holden right away. And he walked off. It took some time, but soon, the Fun Fair charity was launched near Croven's Gate. Many people came to the Fun Fair and had lots of fun. When the Fun Fair was over, the Scarlowy Railway had raised over £2,000. Mr. Holden was excited and visited Rusty in the sheds that evening. I can't thank you enough, smiled Mr. Holden. I really appreciate this. I will never forget what you did. And neither will Stepney. His name? Rusty asked. Yes, I'll be sure to bring him here one day, I promise. And Mr. Holden left, ready to head back to Maryland. 2 years had passed since Mr. Holden's visit. One morning, Henry pulled into Croven's Gate with exciting news for Rusty. Have you heard? He said excitedly. Stepney, the Bluebell engine, is coming to visit Sodor. Really? Yes, and he's braving his way through the diesels on the other railway just for us. Such a brave engine. As Henry left, Rusty's face fell. He's braving his way through all those nasty diesels. He probably won't even look at me when he knows I'm one too. And he glumly rolled away. A few hours had passed, and Rusty was taking a break before his next goods train. Coming into sight was a large tank engine, painted in gold with the name Stepney on the side tanks. Hello there, smiled the tank engine. I'm Stepney, the Bluebell engine. Ah, you must be Rusty. Rusty was aghast. You've heard of me? Of course, chuckled Stepney. My owner, Mr. Holden, told me all about how you suggested the idea to start a charity to raise enough money to save me. I want to say thank you for everything. I was cooped up in that scrapyard with those nasty diesels for so long, and the impression that all diesels are vicious and rude, but you changed that. I'm glad to know that there are diesels out there with hearts of gold, just like you. Rusty had trouble forming the words. Oh, you're welcome, he stuttered.
Well, I'd best be off now. The others are anticipating my arrival. Hope to see you again soon.
As Stepney puffed away into the distance, Rusty watched proudly on, knowing that he had done good for another fellow engine.
Henry liked being at Crewe, but was glad to come home. A crowd of people waited to see him arrive in his new shape. He looked so splendid and strong that they gave him 3 cheers. Peep, peep, thank you very much, he whistled happily. I'm happy to say, too, that the Fat Controller was also very impressed with Henry's new shape. He asked him if he would like to take the express sometimes. Yes, please, sir, he whistled excitedly. So whenever Gordon was tired or ill, Henry would take the express. He did it so well that the Fat Controller started to make special arrangements. Peep, peep, whistled Percy, rushing into the yards. Guess what I've heard? Gordon was getting ready to take his train. I don't have time, Percy. Would you just tell me, please? The Fat Controller says he's so impressed with Henry's work that he's given him the express. Nonsense, whooshed Gordon. The Fat Controller could never replace me so easily. But I heard him, Percy insisted. You must have misheard. You're always talking out of the station limits. However, Gordon was a little worried as he left the sheds to collect his train. Gordon thundered down the line and was pleased when he arrived early. However, when he got back to the sheds, he frowned at what he saw. There was Henry, being oiled, polished, and looked all over.
"I'm taking the express tomorrow,"
he said with a grin. Gordon spluttered.
"Your what?" "Sir Topham Hatt said some inspectors wanted to see how fast I can go, so they've given me your express." "You won't be as fast as me. I'm the fastest engine on this island,"
Gordon scoffed. Henry didn't have a chance to respond, for as soon as Gordon stopped in the sheds, he fell crossly asleep. The next morning, Gordon was abruptly woken as men once again fussed about Henry to make sure he was ready. Presently, Gordon's crew came to get him ready for work too. "Come on, Gordon, we've got a train to pull today," called his driver. Gordon only snorted.
"No, I don't. Henry has stolen my train and now there's nothing for me to do."
"Oh, but there is," his fireman laughed. They took Gordon to the yard, where they met Percy arranging his train.
"Trucks!"
Gordon thundered. "The Fat Controller asked you to take it," replied Percy.
"Fine. But if I must pull trucks, I'll show Henry how a proper big engine pulls them. So there."
He bumped the trucks as he rumbled out of the yard.
Come on,
he shouted to them. We don't want to, they chanted back, but Gordon simply ignored them. Before long, Gordon was going very fast, and the trucks, not used to being rattled about, wanted to pay him back. Soon, he was running as quickly as his driver would let him, but he still wanted to go faster. The signalman wasn't expecting him to be so early at the next station, so he had not yet set the signals. As they came into view, the driver saw a red signal and shut off steam. This was the chance the trucks needed. On! They giggled.
Stop!
Gordon shouted, but the silly trucks carried on. They thundered past the red signal, the trucks bashing into each other more and more. His driver fought for control, and at last had his engine brought to a stop, well beyond the station. Gordon was very lucky and stayed on the rails, but some of his trucks had knocked themselves all to pieces. He was very embarrassed, but was even more ashamed when the signalman came stomping up to meet him. "You silly great engine," he shouted. "Don't you know not to pass a red signal? Not only that, you've blocked the line and delayed the express. The Fat Controller won't be pleased." The Fat Controller wasn't pleased and told Gordon as much. "If you can't behave with trucks, then I cannot trust you to behave with passengers."
"You already don't, sir. Not that you've given Henry my express,"
Gordon sulked. The Fat Controller paused and stared. "Henry isn't taking your express, Gordon. He's going to be taking express goods. The inspector simply wanted to see how Henry would perform in his new shape."
But...
Gordon spluttered before going red in the face. He said nothing of it more and stared at his buffers. The Fat Controller continued. "I would never be so quick to replace you, Gordon. Ever. But I will not stand for your foolishness. You shall be stuck on slow goods until I can trust you to behave." He turned on his heel, and Gordon was left with a lot to think about. That night in the sheds, Henry could only chuckle.
Well, 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 Gordon. You wanted to show me how to pull trucks, didn't you? Well, all you've really shown me, you know, is that even the biggest and fastest engines can get things very, very wrong.
He paused impressively.
Pride comes before the fall, you know.
Gordon felt his position deeply. But I think he deserved it. Don't you?
I'm not happy, complained Gordon. Your firebox is out of order, said James. No wonder, after all that coal you had yesterday. Hard work brings good appetite, snapped Gordon. You wouldn't understand. I know, put in Duck brightly. It's boiler ache. I warned you about that standpipe on the other railway, but you drank gallons. It's not boiler ache, protested Gordon. Of course it is, said Henry. That water's bad. It furs up your tubes. Your boiler must be full of sludge. Have a good wash out. Then you'll feel a different engine. Don't be vulgar, said Gordon huffily. Gordon backed down on his train, hissing mournfully. Cheer up, Gordon, said the Fat Controller. I can't, sir. The others say I've got boiler ache, but I haven't, sir. I keep thinking about the dreadful state of the world, sir. Is it true, sir, what the diesels say? What do they say? They boast that they've abolished steam, sir. Yes, Gordon, it is true. What, sir? All my Doncaster brothers drawn the same time as me? All gone, except one. The guard's whistle blew, and Gordon puffed sadly away. Poor old Gordon, said the Fat Controller. If only we could. Yes, I'll ask his owner at once. He hurried away. One evening, Gordon's driver ran back excited. Wake up, Gordon! The Fat Controller's given you a surprise. Look! Gordon could hardly believe it. Backing towards him were two massive green tenders, and their engine shape was very like his own. It's Flying Scotsman, he gasped. The Fat Controller's brought him to see me. Oh, thank you, sir. Gordon's toot of joy was drowned by Flying Scotsman's as he drew happily alongside. Next day, the two engines were photographed side by side. You've changed a lot, smiled Flying Scotsman. I had a rebuild at Crewe. They didn't do a proper Doncaster job, of course, but it serves. I had a rebuild, too, and looked hideous. But my owner said I was an extra special engine and made them give me back my proper shape. Is that why you have two tenders, being special? No, you'd hardly believe it, Gordon, but over there, they've hardly any coal and water. But surely, every proper railway... Exactly. You are lucky, Gordon, to have a controller who knows how to run railways. Everyone got on well with Flying Scotsman, except Henry. Henry was jealous. Tenders are marks of distinction, he complained. Everybody knows that. Why's he got two? He's famous, explained Duck and Donald. He was the second to go 100 miles an hour. Besides, the other railway has no coal and water. Whew, sniffed Henry. I can't believe that. I never boast, he continued, but I always work hard enough for two. I deserve another tender for that. Duck whispered something to Donald. Henry, asked Duck innocently, would you like my tenders? Yours? Exclaimed Henry. What have you got to do with tenders? All right, said Duck. The deal's off. Would you like 'em, Donald? I wouldn't deprive you of the honour. It is a great honour, said Duck thoughtfully. But I'm only a tank engine, so I don't really understand tenders. Perhaps James might... sorry I was rude, said Henry hastily. How many tenders have you, and when could I have them? 6. And you can have them this evening. 6 lovely tenders, chortled Henry. What a splendid sight I'll be. That will show the others the sort of engine I am. Henry was excited. Do you think it'll be all right? He asked for the umpteenth time. Of course, said Duck. Just go where I told you, and they'll be ready. Meanwhile, word had gone round, and the others waited where they could get a good view. Henry was cheered to the echo when he came, but he wasn't a splendid sight. He had 6 tenders, true, but they were very old and very dirty. All were filled with boiler sludge. Had a good wash out, Henry? Called a voice. That's right. You feel a different engine now? Henry wasn't sure, but he thought the voice was Gordon's.
A new shipment of coal had arrived on the island. It seemed fine to begin with, but as the new coal replaced the old, the problems quickly began to take hold. Bigger engines like Gordon and Henry didn't have much trouble, but for smaller engines like James and Edward, it caused poor steaming. Things got so bad that engines had to be left in the shed if they couldn't get their fires going. Gordon felt sorry for them at first, but he soon found he had to take others' trains as well as his own. This made him cross.
You're just lazy, you know,
Gordon said one morning.
No, I'm not. I can't help it if the coal is bad.
I've no problem with it. I carry on day after day, and what do I get for being reliable? I am given your goods.
No rest for the wicked.
Oh, you get all the rest you want, but I'm here doing the real work.
James was about to retort, but he suddenly sneezed and blew soot out of his funnel, with most of it landing on Gordon. Gordon seized under his breath and quickly left the yards to avoid attention. That day, the big engine had to take a slow goods train. He sulked all the way and was difficult to move as he shunted the trucks onto his train. The big blue engine was catching his breath in a siding, ready to climb the hill himself, when a shout came from the signal box.
Edward's dropped his fire bars, cried the signalman. You'll have to bring him the rest of the way.
Now, look here, you know. I am not a rescue engine.
He refused to move. His crew argued with him fiercely, and the signalman joined in too.
All right. Golly.
Gordon at last grumbled and gave in and set off. He found Edward at the junction to his branch line. The little blue engine was red in the face and very embarrassed, but he felt better when he saw Gordon.
I really am very sorry about all of this. This new coal is causing all sorts of havoc.
Gordon didn't say anything. He was fed up with this new coal and quickly moved the train to the station. The two arrived at the platform, and Edward smiled.
Thank you again for this.
Don't mention it, Gordon grunted.
Well,
Edward started.
I should mention that this train needs to get to the big station.
Gordon looked at Edward, then looked at his buffers, and finally heaved a long sigh.
Fine.
Gordon moved Edward off the train and into the siding. There was no time for him to turn around, so he set off for the big station, tender first. The big engine was careful not to travel too quickly in his current position and was very anxious when he arrived 10 minutes late at the other end of the line. As the passengers got out of the coaches, Gordon began pondering to himself.
What's so important about this train anyway?
But his thoughts were cut off prematurely.
Where are your trucks, Gordon?
He was startled to see the fat controller walking up to him.
I'm sorry, sir. I know you said for me to only take goods, sir, but I...
Gordon was quickly interrupted as one of his passengers stepped out and walked towards the fat controller. It was Lady Hat.
Well, without Gordon, I would have been delayed for much, much longer, dear. Gordon did put up a little bit of a fuss, dear, but he put that aside to bring the passengers home. And he did it running backwards. And I know you're always saying that isn't proper.
Well, Gordon, I must apologise and thank you for rescuing this train and bringing my lovely wife home. Well done.
Gordon gave a small smile.
However, I do not approve of your complaints. Since the other engines are still in some difficulties, I would like you to stay on goods trains. Hopefully we can come to rely on your great strength until this situation has resolved itself.
Yes, sir, said Gordon mournfully. As Gordon trundled back to his waiting trucks, he realised something.
If the fat controller is indeed relying on me, then I have a duty of care to not let him down. I'm still useful after all.
And so Gordon puffed away with a smile. I think it was very wise of him to realise that helping his friends is far more important than being stuck on goods trains.
James was waiting at the junction for Thomas, who was running late. I reckon I have time for a snooze. He yawned and closed his eyes. His nap was soon rudely interrupted by a sharp toot of a horn. A long, green diesel buzzed into the station. Dreadfully sorry. I'm late, dear. Bull on the line, as per usual. Who are you? And where's Thomas? He asked. Thomas's driver was ill, she explained. So I'm taking his morning train for him. How unfortunate for him and me. Oh, I'm sorry. I just realized I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Daisy. And you are? Leaving. He snorted away, leaving Daisy rather bemused. Nice to meet you, Daisy called, surprised to be irritated. That evening, James returned to the sheds. To his dismay, the other engines were talking about Daisy.
Daisy,
said Gordon.
Yes, I've heard of her too. A bit fussy and appreciates the finer things, but a hard worker nonetheless. Now, doesn't that sound familiar, James?
Chirped Henry. James didn't respond. The next morning, James puffed into the junction. He groaned in anticipation to see Daisy again, but was relieved to hear a friendly whistle and the puff of a steam engine drawing into the station. Hello, James, said Thomas. Long time no see. Oh, thank goodness, said James. You're back. I never left, chuckled Thomas. Now that my driver's better, I'm back in service. Oh, good, sighed James with relief. It's good to see that old diesel sent packing. Thomas was confused. Whatever do you mean, James? That diesel that ran here while you were gone. Daisy, was it? Daisy? Daisy isn't gone. She simply runs the branch line with me. As if on cue, Daisy's horn tooted in the distance, and she came swerving into the station. Oh, hello, Thomas, she said sweetly. Her eyes fell on James. Oh, it's you. What are you doing here? Unlike some of us, remarked James. Proper work, pulling coaches. What do you mean by that? Spluttered Daisy. I do plenty of proper work. Just ask Thomas. Indeed she does, said Thomas firmly. Pah! Retorted James and snorted off in a huff. As James made his way down the main line, rain began to pour down on the rails. Soon he neared Gordon's hill, and as he approached the hill, his wheels began to slip.
Take a run at it, James!
Checked his driver. James tried his best, but it was too much. Exhausted, he gave up and backed down the hill.
I'll send for a back engine,
said the fireman. It wasn't long before the engine arrived. To James's dismay, it was Daisy. Well, well, she said smugly. Is this proper work now, dear? James groaned, feeling sorry for himself. Daisy smiled. Cheer up, dear. Now, how about we show this hill what we're made of? James agreed. With James in front and Daisy pushing behind, the two made their way up the hill. Soon, James began to slip again. The engine tugged fiercely at the coaches. Come on, he barked. Not so rough, dear, snapped Daisy. Calm down so I can push. James did so, and soon he noticed it became easier. That's better, soothed Daisy. Finally, the pair made it over the hill. The engines tooted with triumph as they coasted down the hill. James glided into the station, and the passengers all got out. Daisy drew alongside. James smiled widely. Thank you for helping me. How did you do that on the hill? Simply one of the perks of being highly sprung, darling, responded Daisy. James was impressed. The two are now great friends. They often see each other at the junction and chat together about things like being highly sprung and shiny paintwork. And James now knows that just because someone is different doesn't mean they can't help.
James was now pulling the express in Gordon's place. He would blow his whistle as he sped past the other engines and boast endlessly at the sheds. One day, he came into the yard as Gordon was being cleaned. Best be on standby today, Gordon, he whistled. Gordon was confused.
What for?
Always good to be ready when starting a career as a relief engine, James laughed. Gordon rolled his eyes, but James continued. Don't worry about me, though. I'm on the express, and you won't be seeing me again until you hear the passengers singing my praises. And he puffed snootily off to the shed.
That'll be the day,
the blue engine muttered under his breath. Gordon soon left to take another goods train to the middle station. He charged at the hill to get a good run up. But he was out of breath as he pulled into the sidings.
I'll be fine, I just need to catch my breath,
he said to his driver. They suddenly heard a whistle in the distance. Can you hear that? Said the fireman.
Sounds very hoarse, the driver observed. It's James,
Gordon exclaimed. And it was. He came in panting and wheezing into the station with the express in tow. Black, dirty smoke plumed from his funnel. With a final effort, James stopped at the platform, unable to move another yard. That's that then, his driver said, mopping his brow. Gordon watched from the sidings as James was uncoupled. Then the signalman came up to him. We need you to take James off the train while another engine takes over. Gordon smirked and agreed.
I thought you promised me I wouldn't be seeing you again,
he said innocently. Shut up, came the exasperated reply.
Oh, but can you hear it, James? It's the sound of the passengers singing your praises. Or it might be them coughing at the smoke.
Gordon chuckled as he moved James into a siding, then went back to his goods train and watched the platform. Passengers were swarming at the station master, asking all sorts of questions that he couldn't answer. When are we getting underway? Where is the new engine?
Is it going to be a long wait?
It was all very chaotic. Gordon knew what the Fat Controller would say, but he took a deep breath and cut through the crowd with a long, shrill whistle.
May I help?
This seemed to pacify the passengers instantly, and the station master escaped the yard to speak with Gordon. Won't the Fat Controller be angry with you on passenger trains?
He'll be far more angry if the passengers are kept waiting,
Gordon said. The station master knew he was right, and quickly went to arrange it all with the signalman. When everything was ready, Gordon backed down onto the coaches, and the guard herded the passengers back to their seats. With a long whistle, the driver carefully eased open the regulator, and Gordon rolled out of the station. Before long, the train was at full speed, and Gordon was happy to be helping the passengers. Stations and countryside flashed by. The passengers were singing his praises. And in no time, Gordon arrived at the other end of the line. The passengers disembarked and thanked Gordon and his crew. When the crowd had disappeared, the big blue engine saw the Fat Controller waiting on the platform.
I see you're taking passengers again, Gordon. Despite my orders,
he started. Gordon quickly tried to compose himself, but the Fat Controller held up his hand for silence.
I was told all about James by the signalman, and I'm proud of you for helping all the passengers. I see now that you are a really useful engine again. Would you like to have the express back?
Gordon's smile widened.
Oh, yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
But before you take the express, I would like you to go and collect a new, clean shipment of coal.
Of course, sir.
Gordon whistled happily and puffed away. A better and wiser engine. He doesn't mind Henry having his own express now. He knows that so long as he's a really useful engine, the Fat Controller will never, ever replace him.
The two diesels surveyed the shed. "It's time, 7101, said one, that we took this railway over. Shush, 199. It's their railway, after all. Not for long, persisted 199. Our controller says steam engines spoil our image. Of course we do, snapped Duck. We show what frauds you are. Call yourselves engines? If anything happens, you care nothing for your train. You just moan for a fitter. We bring it home, if only on one cylinder. Nothing, boasted 199, ever happens to us. We are reliable. Vulgar noises greeted this. How rude, said 199. You asked for it, growled 7101. Now shut up. Next day, Henry was rolling home tender first. I'm a failed engine, he mourned. Lost my regulator. driver says it jammed wide open, and he can't mend it till I'm cool. However, he went on, I got steam, and driver can use my reverser, but it would happen after Duck fooled me with those tenders. Now they'll laugh at me again. He reached a signal box and stopped, whistling for a road. Opposite the box, on the up line, stood Diesel 199 with a train of oil tankers. Worse and worse, thought Henry. Now old Reliable will laugh at me too. The signalman came out. For pity's sake, take this spam can away. It's failed. The Limited is behind. And all he does is wail for his fitter. Spam can, fumed 199. I'm stow it, snapped the signalman, or I'll take my tin opener to you. Now then. 199 subsided at this dreadful threat, and Henry pulled the train out of the way. The Diesel didn't help. He just sulked. The Limited rushed by with a growl and a roar. Henry gave a chuckle. Look, spam can, he said. There's your little pal. The Diesel said nothing. He hoped 7101 hadn't noticed. 7101 hadn't noticed. He had troubles of his own. He was cross with his coaches. They seemed to be getting heavier. He roared at them, but it did no good. 7101's ejector had failed. The brakes were already leaking on while he passed Henry. He struggled on for half a mile before being brought to a stand, growling furiously, unable to move a wheel. Well, well, well. Did you hear what Signalman said? I thought they'd be laughing at me, chuckled Henry. Now the joke's on them. Moving 2 dead diesels and their trains, said his driver thoughtfully. That's no joke for a failed engine. Do you think you can do it? I'll have a good try, said Henry with spirit. Anyway, 7101's better than old Spam Can. He did try and shut him up last night. Come on then, said his driver. We mustn't keep the passengers waiting. Get moving, you! Henry puffed the sulky diesel into motion and started to the rescue. Henry gently buffered up to the express. While the 2 drivers talked, his fireman joined his front brake pipe to the coaches. It's better than we thought, Henry, said his driver. The diesel can pull if we keep the brakes off. So the only weight we'll have is Spam Can's goods. Oh, said Henry. That's a mercy. He was, by now, feeling rather puffed. Poop, 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 poop. Are you ready? Tooted 7101. Peep, 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 peep. Yes, I am, whistled Henry. So was 7101 growling in front, and Henry gamely puffing in the middle, the long cavalcade set out for the next big station. Donald and Flying Scotsman were waiting. They cheered as Henry puffed past. He braked the coaches thankfully. Spam Can and the tankers trailed far behind. The passengers buzzed out like angry bees, but the Fat Controller told them about Henry, so they forgot to be cross and thanked Henry instead. They called him an enterprising engine and took his photograph. They were thrilled, too, when Flying Scotsman backed down on their train. If the guard hadn't tactfully shooed them to their coaches, the train would have started later than ever. Donald took the goods. Return 199 to the other railway, ordered the Fat Controller. I will write my views later. Henry and 7101 went away together. I'm sorry about last night, ventured the Diesel. That's all right. You did shut old Reliable up. And, said the Diesel ruefully, made a fool of myself today, too. Rubbish. A failed ejector might happen to anyone. I'd lost my regulator. You? Failed? Exclaimed the Diesel. And yet, his voice trailed away in admiration. Well, said Henry, emergency, you know. Trains must get through. 7101 said no more. He had a lot to think about.
Picture a land where the sky is so blue, storybook land of wonder, magical island just waiting for you. Island of Sodor will make your dreams come true. Imagine a place where the sun always smiles, the valleys are green as can be. The friends that you love are waiting for you. Island of Sodor, make your dreams come true. Children, follow the dream to a land of make-believe. The island of Sodor, magical land where dreams come true. Follow the road that leads to your dream, over the hills and mountains. Look for the skies with stars in their eyes. Island of Sodor will make your dreams come true. Children, follow the dream to a land of make-believe. The island of Sodor, magical land where dreams come true. The island of Sodor, magical land
Douglas had taken the midnight goods to a station on the other railway. He was shunting, ready for his return journey, when he heard a faint... That sounds like an engine, he thought. The came again. This time it sounded almost despairing. Who's there? He asked. A whisper came. Are you a Fat Controller's engine? Aye, I'm proud of it. Thank goodness. I'm Oliver. We're escaping to your railway, but we've run out of coal and have no more steam. Is it from scrap you're escaping? Yes. Then it's glad I'll be to help ye. But we maun work fast. Both crews joined in, wrote out transit labels, and chalked scrap everywhere they could. Douglas marshalled Oliver in front of his train. No time to turn round, he panted. A maun run tender first. Yee-hoo! Yee-hoo! Yelled a passing diesel. A steamer's escaping! Yoo-hoo! Douglas puffed firmly on. Take no notice, he counselled. But they were stopped before they could clear the station's throat. The foreman's lamp shone on Oliver. Ah, he exclaimed. A Western engine. His light flickered further back. A Western auto coach and goods brake too. You can't take these. Can we? No, said Douglas's driver. They're all for us. See for yourself. Douglas's guard showed him the labels and papers. Seems in order, said the foreman grudgingly. But it's queer. Sure and it is, began the guard. But I could tell you queerer. So could I, interrupted the foreman. Right away, guard. A near thing, puffed Douglas with relief. We've had worse, smiled Oliver. We ran at night. Friendly signalmen would pass us from box to box when no trains were about. We got on well till Control heard about a mystery train. Then they tried to hunt us down. What did you do? A signalman let us hide on an old quarry branch. Driver, fireman and guard blocked the cutting with rubbish. We stayed there for days, with diesels baying and growling like hounds outside. I was very frightened then. Small blame to ye, said Douglas feelingly. Presently, they rumbled over the bridge and onto the Fat Controller's railway. We're home. They can't catch you now. Tell Isabel and Toad, please. Douglas called out the news and heard a joyful ting-a-ling-a-ling, ting-a-ling-a-ling. He was surprised. Oliver chuckled. That's Isabel, he said. There's a bell on her, you see. She's clever. Je ne sais. Douglas was impressed. About this Toad, he continued. Is he? What you wished, said his driver. Yon's the works. We maun slip in unbeknownst and find a place for Oliver. Douglas tried hard to be quiet, but the night foreman heard them and had to be told their secret. I know just the place, he said, and showed them an empty siding nicely hidden away. Oliver said goodbye and thank you, and Douglas puffed away. Yon's an enterprising engine, he thought. I won away here with Donald, but I'd have been feared to do it on my own. Douglas arrived back in time to see Flying Scotsman take his enthusiasts home. The Fat Controller said he had all been honoured, and thanked Flying Scotsman and his owner for their help. Please tell everyone, he went on, that whatever happens elsewhere, steam will still be at work here. We shall be glad to welcome all who want to see and travel behind real engines. This announcement was greeted with cheers. And Flying Scotsman departed to the strains of Will Ye No Come Back Again, led, as one might expect, by Donald and Douglas. At last Douglas could tell his news. They were all excited about it, and agreed that something must be done for Oliver. I'm feared, said Donald, Some murdering diesel may creep in, and him there alone, lacking steam even to whistle for help. You're right, said James. He won't be safe till the Fat Controller knows. Douglas should tell him at once, said Gordon firmly. Is it me speak to the Fat Controller? It's forwarded, think me, and maybe interfering. Well, here he is, said a cheerful voice. Now, what's all this about? Duck broke the awkward silence. Beg pardon, sir, but we do need another engine. I agree, Duck. That is why I am giving 7101 another chance. Their faces showed such dismay that the Fat Controller had difficulty with his own. Sir, ventured Gordon at last, we had hoped for a real engine. They, said the Fat Controller gravely, are rare, and unless one escapes, there's little hope. But, sir, burst out Donald, one has. And thanks to Douglas, is now at our works, announced the Fat Controller. Sir, gasped Douglas, is there anything you don't know? More than you think, he laughed. Oliver's crew told me all you did, Douglas. Och, sir, you couldn't see a braw wee engine and him in trouble and no do a wheel's turn. More than a wheel's turn, I fancy. Douglas, I'm pleased with you. Oliver, Isabel and Toad will soon be ours. Oliver and Isabel are just what we need for Duck's branch line. Loud cheers greeted this announcement. And Toad wants to be your brake van, Douglas. Thank you, sir. I'd hoped for that. He and I'll do brawly together. That, of course, made everything right. Henry spoke a good word for 7101, and the others gave him a welcome. He had good manners for a start, so Henry didn't find it hard to teach him our ways. 7101 finds them different from those of the other railway, but much more interesting. He is now quite a useful engine. They teased him at first because of his growls. They said he was like a bear. He still growls, not because he's cross, but because he can't help it. His name, Bear, has stuck. He likes it. It's nicer than just a number, he says. Having a name means that you really belong. The Fat Controller soon had Oliver, Isabel and Toad mended and painted in full Great Western colours. Then he rescued 3 more Western auto coaches. 2, Alice and Mirabelle, he gave to Duck. The 3rd, Dulcie, joined Oliver and Isabel. Duck and Oliver are happy on their branch line. It runs along the coast to the small railway. We reopen branches, they boast. They're very proud of this indeed. The others laughed at first and called their branch the Little Western. Duck and Oliver were delighted. And now, no one ever thinks of calling it anything else.
Daisy the diesel rail car had learned a valuable lesson when her refusal to pull her milk van had led to Percy becoming perched awkwardly atop an old brake van. The Fat Controller had given her a second chance, which she was determined not to squander. Percy and Daisy had not spoken since the accident. Percy still blamed Daisy for what had happened and avoided her at every turn. This made Daisy feel very sad. She tried to explain herself to anyone who would listen, but everyone was so tired of hearing it that it fell on deaf ears. Thomas, however, had been at the works at the time of Percy's accident and did not fully understand what had happened, which, I'm sorry to say, made him Daisy's newest sounding board. And then Percy ended up on top of the brake van, Thomas repeated one afternoon after Daisy ran through the story for the umpteenth time. And then he ended up on the brake van! Oh dear, she cried. Thomas was running out of kind things to say. He was beginning to get annoyed. The next day, Thomas dozed in a siding before his morning passenger train. He awoke to hear Daisy approaching. Here we go again, he muttered under his breath. Thomas, do you think I'm horrid for what I did? She screeched. Thomas lost patience. Daisy, I don't have time to listen to your story again. I've got a train to take. Oh, you're just like the others. I asked for help and I'm met with a cold buffer. Stuff and nonsense, Thomas seethed. You've not asked for anything, only repeated the same story over and over again. What is it you actually want, Daisy? For Percy to like me again. Thomas sighed. Why don't you talk to Percy? That would clear the air between the two of you. Oh, Daisy sighed. I couldn't do that. Why not? He might yell at me. Thomas chuckled to himself. He knew that Percy was not the kind of engine to yell at anyone. Later that day, Thomas found Percy in the station yard preparing to take a goods train to the harbor. Percy, Thomas started. That Daisy thinks she's so prim and proper. Can't even pull one van. If she hadn't done that, I never would have offered to pull Toby's trucks, and I never would have ended up on that blasted van. Thomas rolled his eyes and listened patiently. As the week went on, both Daisy and Percy complained about the other whenever they saw Thomas. Anytime he tried to talk sense into either of them, he was met with an even louder fussing. This is getting out of hand, laughed Thomas's driver. We better do something. Quick! And he whispered to Thomas. Of course, Thomas said. Why didn't I think of that before? The next morning, Percy pulled into the station yard to see that Daisy's milk van was gone. Phew, that's good, he said. But then, Daisy came in, red in the face. Where's my milk van? I'll be late if I don't. She saw Percy and stopped dead in her tracks. The two glared at each other for a long time. Where is my milk van? She asked through her gritted teeth. That's what I'd like to know. Did you get Toby to pull it for you again? What? Certainly not. The nerve. The two began bickering, but they were interrupted by the station master. Stop arguing, you two. If we don't find that milk van, the Fat Controller will be cross. It looks like you two will just have to work together to find it. What? Me? Work with him? Daisy gasped. Me? Work with her? Percy snapped. The station master made it very clear. The Fat Controller did not like misplaced trucks. I know it was right here, Percy said. Well, it's not here now, scolded Daisy. Will you just be quiet and help me? I am helping! You're just too stubborn to admit that we've looked in the same spot over and over again. Yes, well, you're too stubborn to admit your mistake about the milk van before. I wouldn't have landed on that brake van if you had just done what you were told. It was all out in the open now. Daisy looked down at her buffers, ashamed. I'm sorry, Percy. I had no idea that all of that would have led to your accident. Honestly, I didn't. Percy was disarmed. He fully expected Daisy to defend herself. Why do you think I take my milk van now? I'm trying to make it up to you, Percy. Now Percy felt ashamed too. I accept your apology, Daisy. I'm sorry for keeping a grudge for this long. It's been really silly that we've been arguing over a milk van. Why, if I hadn't been more careful with those trucks, I might have avoided the accident altogether. And for the first time, the two smiled at one another. Then, Thomas rolled into the yard with the milk van in tow. Ah, you see? I knew this would help you two settle your differences. Percy and Daisy leered at Thomas. Ah, so you're the one who stole the milk van, Daisy scoffed. That was really irresponsible of you, Thomas, Percy bellowed. Thomas tried to explain, but it was to no use. Soon, Percy and Daisy were giving him an earful about the importance of not messing with other engines' trucks. That's what I get for helping, said Thomas, but he said it to himself.
Bertie the bus has worked around Thomas's branch line for years. He is friendly, but sometimes reckless. He was going in for overhaul soon, but he had been asked to take the quarrymen to work. He was confused as to why until he pulled into the yard at the top station to find Mavis. "Hello, hello, here's an unfamiliar face," he joked. Mavis was glad to see him. "Long time no see, Hot Rod." The two laughed and began chatting. "What brings you down here? Fancy a career change?" "Manager said I could come and shunt down here whilst the tramway was under repair," Mavis answered. Bertie looked down the line. "Did they not want you helping?" "Manager says Toby was better suited to the job," she harumphed. "Ah, well," Bertie soothed. "Better this than you collecting dust, eh?" "It's funny. I finally get to leave the quarry, and yet I'm still shunting trucks for Toby." "Is there much excitement at the quarry?" Bertie asked. "Oh, yes. Once a group of men filled the foreman's cars with stones and got away scot-free." "I shouldn't like to be filled with stones. My passengers wouldn't have anywhere to sit." Mavis chuckled. "Neither would I, but I've never seen the foreman go so red. He'd give your paint a run for its money." "Speaking of," Bertie interrupted, "the workmen are here. Goodbye, Mavis." And he started for the quarry. With the tramway closed, the quarry manager had employed local lorries to help move the material down the stone wharf. When Bertie arrived, he almost fell into a ditch when he swerved to avoid one of them. "Silly thing's overloaded," Bertie scolded. The manager explained.
"We're down a lorry, and we've got an important shipment due." "What happened?"
Bertie's driver asked.
"Stupid lorry got lost on the way here and reversed into a ditch on the tramway,"
the manager snapped. Bertie and his driver understood. Bertie wondered if there was anything he could do to help, until he remembered what Mavis had told him. "Can we help take some of it down?" Both the driver and manager were surprised.
"Bertie, you're a boss, not a goods lorry."
"Yes, but I've got space to carry them. I'm going in for repairs soon anyway. And," he added, "we're not doing anything else today." He scratched his head.
"I suppose it'll be all right, so long as your owner doesn't mind."
Arrangements were quickly made, and the unusual sight of quarrymen loading stones into a bus was well underway.
"Take care,"
the manager called as Bertie left the quarry. Bertie smiled to himself. "Clever me! This'll be a quick and easy job, then it's off to the shop." But it wasn't easy. The stones were much heavier than his usual passengers, and he found it hard to maneuver, and his driver was anxious.
"We'll wreck into something if we're not careful."
Fortunately, they reached the wharf without incident. Mavis was surprised to see him, and even more surprised when the stones were unloaded. "Hello again," she said. "Fancy a career change?" Bertie chuckled. "Just doing what I can to help out." "It's a surprise for sure," Mavis started, "that you've been keeping busy and collecting dust." And the two of them laughed. When Bertie returned to the depot, his owner was waiting for him.
"I'm proud of you, I am, Bertie," he said. "Whilst this was unusual, the quarry manager has offered to pay for your repairs in return for your help. Think of that!"
Bertie beamed brighter than his headlights, though between you and me, he hopes he never has to be a goods lorry again.
Gordon was feeling unwell. While he was being mended, the Fat Controller asked Bear to look after the express. Bear was excited. He loved thundering down the line and quickly made friends with the passengers and coaches. "I can see why you all love this train," he would say to the others. "You really feel a part of the railway when you pull it." The other engines understood Bear's feelings all too well and were very happy for him. All except one. One evening, Bear arrived back at the shed after the last express of the day. The other engines were already there. "Have a good run, Bear?" asked Henry. "It couldn't have been better," smiled Bear. "That makes one of us," grumbled James. "Why can't someone else have a turn instead?" The others rolled their eyes, but Bear was sympathetic. "Tell you what, why don't we swap jobs tomorrow? I'll do your work, and you can take the express," finished James, his voice filled with the sounds of euphoria. Next morning, after their drivers had agreed to the change, James left to pull the express, while Bear went to take a goods train. "Make way for an important engine," called James as he raced past Bear at the junction. "And hello to you too," chuckled Bear. Soon, Bear arrived at the workstation. As he shunted his trucks into a siding, the foreman came up. "Glad to see you've arrived," he said. "Your coaches are waiting for you in the workshop." "Coaches?" puzzled Bear. Lined up in the works was a rake of brand new express coaches ready to be taken to Tidmouth. "How splendid," said Bear admiringly, catching sight of his reflection in their paintwork. As he left, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something all too familiar. As he passed a station further along, Bear felt the train getting heavier. "Oh, not again," he sighed knowingly. Indeed, thanks to a defect, the air brakes on one of the coaches had failed, and before Bear knew it, the train had slowed to a crawl. They struggled on to a signal box, hooting for a road. The signalman set the points onto a passing loop and telephoned back up the line to halt the express. "It's too late," replied the second signalman in a panicked voice. "You'll have to flag him down." With red flag in hand, the guard shot up the line like a jackrabbit, leaving Bear and his crew to handle the coaches. The sound of screeching brakes filled the air as Bear slowly dragged the coaches into the loop. "Come on," he growled fiercely. "Not again." A familiar whistle sent chills through Bear's radiator. James saw the guard waving his red flag and a coach jutting out onto the main line. "Get out of the way!" he cried frantically, braking with all his might. With an almighty growl, Bear tugged the coaches one final time, bracing for impact. But to his surprise, there was none. James raced past on the main line, Bear's coaches having cleared it just in the nick of time. He gave a sigh of relief. Oh, who would have thought empty coaches could be so exciting? The driver made a temporary fix for the damaged brake line, and Bear was able to bring the coaches to the big station. The fat controller was waiting. "Well done, Bear," he said. "Not only did you stop a nasty accident, but you still managed to bring the coaches home. You're a really useful engine." Bear blushed. "Thank you, sir, but what about the damaged coach?" "Well," said the fat controller, "I suppose we know what James' first job will be tomorrow." Bear couldn't help but chuckle.
Summer is an incredibly busy time for the Fat Controller's Railway. Many people travel on Thomas's branch line to visit the castle near Ulfstead. There were so many visitors. Thomas and Daisy had to run extra trains in the evenings.
I saw a whole throng of them walking near the tramway,
Toby told the others.
I don't think the buses can handle them all.
Thomas agreed, just as Bertie goes out of service, too. What does it matter where they go? Once they're off, they're not our concern. And we're not their concern either. Passengers don't care about us. Thomas glared at her.
Don't be ridiculous, of course they do.
Clearly, you've never been left full of rubbish and forgotten property. Thomas knew it was pointless arguing and fell asleep. Next morning, Thomas's fire was lit as he was prepared for the long day ahead. The firelighter then ran along to the driver's house to make sure he was awake. Glancing through an upstairs window, he saw a light was already on and assumed the driver was awake. But the driver lay asleep, having forgotten to turn the lamp off the night before. Thomas waited for some time. His fireman kept his fire going, and when the driver ran down to the sheds, they were late and running low on coal. They backed Thomas to get some more, but to their horror, the staith was empty. The driver ran over to the station to find out what to do and came back looking glum.
A fire at the big station has delayed our coal delivery. They don't know when it will get here.
What about my commuter run?
Daisy's already left, so we'll just have to get as far as possible with what we have left. Hurry now, time is not on our side.
Thomas quickly rushed over to the platform to find the passengers already waiting. His driver made an announcement to them all.
Thomas is low on coal, so we might not get far, but we'll take you as far as we can.
One of the passengers then spoke up. Would you like some of ours? Everyone on the platform looked at him, then at each other. I don't think we'll need any for a while, certainly not in this heat. They all agreed. The sun was already beating down on them. Neither Thomas, his driver, or fireman knew what to say, but they didn't need to say anything. Several of the people who lived in the village quickly ran to the cottages and returned with buckets of coal from their own stores. A small chain was formed from the station building to Thomas's bunker. There was soon enough for them to make it to the junction, and they quickly left only 10 minutes late.
Slow down, boy,
Thomas's driver called.
The passengers know we'll be late, but they won't be pleased if you burn through all of their coal before we get there.
Thomas relented, but still wanted to make up time. At the junction, they met up with Percy, who, to everyone's delight, had coal for the sheds in tow. You're late, Thomas frowned. So are you. I'm surprised there was enough left. There wasn't. Percy was puzzled.
Then how did you get down here? Indeed, Percy, I will like to know that myself,
said a voice. Thomas jumped in surprise. There on the platform stood the fat controller. Thomas explained about the locals' generosity. You're not cross, are you, sir? I know we'll have to repay them. The fat controller smiled.
Of course I'm not cross. You leave it with me. I'll make it all right with them.
And he did, too. But what about Daisy? You'll just have to find out in the next story.
News of Bear's heroic actions spread fast and people flocked to the island just to see him. His expresses were always full and sometimes extra coaches had to be added.
It's not fair,
fumed James.
I helped stop that accident just as much as Bear did, and he's given the express instead of me. What's he got that I don't?
Well, said Duck cheekily, would you like the full answer or the short answer? James let off steam indignantly and fussed out of the shed. As the weeks went by, more and more passengers came just to see Bear. He admittedly found it all a bit overwhelming. It's not that I don't appreciate the attention, he would tell the others, but there's only so much I can handle.
Never mind, said Henry. I'm sure it'll all die down soon.
But one day, Bear arrived at the station to find an extra long rake of coaches waiting for him. Goodness, he gasped. I'll never manage that alone. The fat controller agreed and left to look for help.
Oh, thank you, sir. You won't be disappointed, I promise.
Just get to the station, James.
But James's confidence quickly waned when he saw just how many passengers were waiting at the platform.
We'll need a shoehorn to get them all in,
exclaimed his driver. Indeed, it took a lot of work. But at last, the guard managed to fit everyone inside the coaches.
Get a move on, get a move on,
puffed James. We're doing it, replied Bear, his engine growling louder than usual. The two engines were making excellent time as they approached Edward Station. They knew the hill lay just ahead and were worried of sticking. Let's charge it, said Bear, and together the two engines began to accelerate. They were halfway up when suddenly Bear's engine faltered, spluttered, and stopped.
What happened?
He coughed, the train now at a standstill.
Your engine's given out,
sighed his driver.
No wonder, after how heavy your expresses have been lately.
Just perfect,
grumbled James, an off-key chorus of complaints sounding from the coaches. They brought the train back to the station where the crew sized up the situation.
We could wait for a banker,
said James's driver,
but it'll be a while and then we'll be late for sure.
As they spoke, James pondered the problem.
No,
he said at last.
We mustn't keep the passengers waiting. I'll handle the train myself. I may stick, but I've got to at least try.
His crew was reluctant, but hesitantly agreed.
I just hope you know what you're doing,
said the fireman.
So do I,
said James, but only to himself. The fireman built up a good head of steam, and with his boiler full of determination, James slowly got the train underway. You're doing well, called Bear from the front as they neared the hill.
I mustn't stick,
puffed James, feeling the weight of the coaches as he began his trek up the hill. His face turned as red as his paint and sparks shot from his funnel, but he didn't give up. Keep going, nearly there, encouraged Bear. Poor James had no spare steam to reply. At last, with one final effort, James crested the hill, the train following behind. You've done it! You've done it! Cheered Bear. At the workstation, the passengers flooded out of the coaches and gave James 3 cheers. Many of them even took his photograph as he shunted Bear into the works. Gordon had been fixed and asked to take the express the rest of the way.
Well done, James,
he said, a hint of pride in his voice.
You've certainly proven yourself a really useful engine.
James said nothing, but the smile on his face spoke volumes.
Percy the green engine was shunting coal wagons at the top station when Daisy pulled into the platform. A throng of visitors poured out of her and quickly dispersed to the station building. Feeling better? Daisy scowled. Filthy floors, sticky seats. Do they have no care for an engine? Percy smiled. I'm sure Thomas knows how you feel. He's not the one filled with rubbish. In fact, he was barely filled with anything this morning. Daisy then smiled wickedly. I suppose that's the cost of being so up-to-date. I'm the most reliable one here, and so I must suffer for our passengers. Reliable? Percy scoffed. What makes you so reliable? Simple. My diesel is always in the tank, never delayed and always available. Mavis and I are the backbone of this branch. Far better than you or Thomas, she purred. Percy wheezed angrily. And you claim greater skill? I don't need to make claims. I know how great I am. She laughed and hurried to the carriage shed to be cleaned out. However, when she went to refuel, she found Mavis at the pump looking worried.
It's not working. Something must be jammed.
But what about me? Daisy cried. What am I going to do now?
You've got just enough fuel to make it to the big station,
Daisy's driver said.
We can refuel there.
Daisy gulped. She was already feeling hot and bothered by the sun, but now she was worried. They soon set off towards the big station, but not soon enough for Daisy. I have to make it. What will they say if I run dry? And she zoomed along the line. Thomas met her at a station. He too was feeling hot and bothered. Why aren't you boiling in this heat? He panted. Daisy faltered and tried to hide her discontent. Well, she said smoothly, I use essential oils, my dear. You mean diesel? Of course. I can't overheat or blow a fuse when I've got a raging fire inside me, or when I'm lumbered with rubbish. She lied, before staring at Annie and Clarabelle. The two coaches were beyond words. Thomas wasn't falling for it. Doesn't stop you blowing a fuse when you get a little dirty or when you try showing off. And he laughed, leaving a fuming Daisy behind. Fortunately, she reached the junction and was eager to get to the big station. Unfortunately for her, the station master ordered her to shunt a loose wagon away into the sidings. She was so bad at it and made such a fuss that when she was ready to leave, her fuel gauge was nearly red. Instead of paying attention, she was thinking what she would next say to Thomas and Percy. The mainline signal dropped, and in her eagerness, she mistook it for hers. Off we go! Quickly now! Stop, you blithering diesel! Her driver called, but it was too late. There was a jolt, a crunch, and a thud. Daisy had fallen off trap point just before the main line.
Now look what you've done. The branch line is blocked. The others won't be pleased about this.
They weren't. Percy had told Thomas, Annie, and Clarabelle what Daisy had said that morning. He was ready to tell her just what he thought, but when he saw Daisy, his indignation turned to hysterics. Oh, serves you right. Thomas guffawed. No, Thomas, Annie started. It swerves her right, Clarabelle finished. The fat controller came to see her. His message was short and blunt.
We can't get you back until the main line is quieter, so you will wait here until then.
Soon, all the engines came to gawk at the incident. Percy giggled when he saw a real display from only an engine who knows just how good they are. For a long time afterward, Daisy was a lot quieter. She ferried passengers without complaint or any boasting, for she knows she isn't as good as she once thought.
Jane had been a really useful engine at the big station. Shunting had been her profession from the other railway, making the engines appreciate her hard work. Though she loved to work on the island of Sodor, she would have had to head back to her own railway. This convinced Sir Topham Hatt to find a new and permanent station pilot. Years later on a winter day, Jane was soon allowed to come back and visit the island of Sodor. She was feeling proud, with her new blue paint with yellow letters SDJR on the side of her tank.
I wonder how the big engines are doing. Hopefully this busy holiday season won't be too much stress on them.
Never mind that, said her driver. We should focus on getting to Knapford by this evening. The rails are slippery in these type of seasons. Jane knew fully well and carefully strolled down the line through Edward's station. That evening, she eventually made it to the big station. There, she saw James at the platform.
Is that James the red engine I see there?
Jane called out as she rolled up to him.
Jane! You came back with a new paint job. Aw, thanks. Just not as good as mine. Sorry, what? Anyway, you came back here to help? Christmas is a busy time of year. With this type of shunting, it'll be nearly impossible to get everything done on time.
Jane looked around the yard.
Whoever did this, I doubt it was Duck. Well, a certain red engine did it. Don't be so self-deprecating. Not everyone can be that perfect. I wasn't referring to me,
James annoyedly explained.
Hello there,
she smiled.
You must be Jane. But that controller mentioned another engine helping us out around here. So you must be the station pilot then. Why, yes I am. Your work here isn't the best, Jane interrupted. You have rolling stock all over the place in the station. I would have to pull an all-nighter to fix this. And she puffed away angrily. What's with her, acting like she owns the place all of a sudden? I think she just wants to be, how should I say this, a professional, James said as he too steamed away. More like a stuck-up engine, Rosie muttered to herself. In the morning, Rosie was headed to the goods yard. She saw Jane already working, pushing trucks into their proper sidings. Good morning there, Rosie, was it? Yeah, that's me. Why not be a good engine, Rosie, and stay on the side? You should watch how an actual shunter should do their work. Rosie was shocked at this statement. She reluctantly agreed as she watched Jane do all the work. Though, as she watched, she could tell Jane was struggling to keep things organized. Rosie wanted to help, but Jane seemed more concerned with the workload. As Jane worked continuously around the yard, she saw a long line of big vans. This may look heavy, but I've got to try. Jane began to pull the vans, but seemed to struggle. The icy rails made it harder for her to pull. Come on, she repeated. Soon her wheels spun helplessly on the rails. Jane thought things couldn't get any worse as she heard Henry's whistle from up ahead. Get out of the way, Jane! Henry yelled as he desperately tried to apply the brakes. Help! Oh, help! Jane cried. Rosie saw the crisis and quickly puffed to the rescue. She pushed Jane back onto the siding as hard as she could, as Henry narrowly passed her. Thank goodness you saved me. That's what a really useful engine would do, Rosie smiled. I'm sorry for coming off as rude. I just wanted to help the other engines out. At least you tried to help out. Tell you what, why not find a compromise on our workload? Would that help? Jane smiled, and she fully agreed. The two engines still get into arguments from time to time, but they can see each other eye to eye on a daily basis. While Jane and Rosie don't consider themselves friends, the other engines best describe them as frenemies.
Oh, Tom, no! Percy exclaimed. They've taken away your van again? And your uniform? Tom chuckled as he parked his bike near the little engine. Don't worry, Percy. My van is safe and sound after the incident with the last bike. I thought I'd try cycling without carrying letters around. I have to say, it's got me fit as a fiddle. Percy was impressed. Does this mean you'll be training for a Tour of France? Driver was telling me how hundreds of people all go on tour at the same time. Tom laughed. I think you mean the Tour de France. That might be a bit much for a postman like myself. But it's very liberating to feel the wind on my face as you rush down a hill. Percy wasn't so sure. He remembered the last time he rushed down a hill and hoped he'd never end up smashing up a brake van again. As the days went on, Tom Tipper on his bike became a far more regular sight. He enjoyed cycling up towards the quarry on his days off and coasting back down into the village. I'm worried you'll have an accident, cautioned Percy. Tom appreciated the concern. I'm always careful in the village. I know those streets like the back of my hand. To his credit, Tom was indeed careful, but his golden streak wouldn't last long. Percy was trundling back up the line with a full goods train. He was running alongside the river when he noticed a familiar figure in the distance. Bless me, Tom. What are you doing here? And why are you covered in mud? Well, he began sheepishly, I was coasting down the hill when a bend in the road just appeared out of nowhere, and I overturned into the river. I didn't know bends in the road could appear out of nowhere. The driver chuckled. They can't. but I think our Tom is bending the truth. Would you like a lift back to the village? Percy offered. You can run in the brake van. Tom thanked them and brought his bike over to the brake van. You're not bringing that in here, the guard scowled. I spent all morning cleaning this van top to bottom. But I can't leave my bike here, Tom protested. Percy had an idea and called back. Why don't I carry it? Tom and the guard stared. Are you sure? I've caused enough trouble. Percy smiled at his friend. It's no trouble at all. So they tied the bike to Percy's tank and quickly steamed off. Tom got off at the top station and shamefully walked his bike back home to clean off the mud. Percy gave him a cheery whistle as he left. Poor Tom doesn't have much luck with bikes. You know, it wouldn't be a shame if I accidentally crushed that one too. But he said that to himself.
Boko loved working on Edward's branch line. The peace and quiet was a welcome change, and he made fast friends with everyone. When he wasn't pulling trains, he often helped bank other engines up the hill. They were appreciative of his help and always said thank you to the diesel. Despite the others' warm opinions of him, Donald and Douglas remained hesitant.
We cannot trust him. He may be better than other diesels we've met, but he's still a diesel.
They would mutter darkly. Boko was well aware of the twins' negative outlook of him, but he wasn't sure what to do.
They aren't horrid engines, comforted Edward, but they can be quite stubborn in their ways. Give them time. I'm sure they'll come around.
Better sooner than later, sighed Boko. One evening, Boko was asked to take a goods train to the other end of the line. On the way, the weather changed for the worse, and by the time Boko arrived, a gale was blowing and the rain pelted down. Boko and his driver decided to seek refuge in the goods shed. I just hope the other engines are safe, shivered Boko, thunder crashing nearby. By morning, the storm was gone, and to Boko's surprise, little damage had been done. Come on, old boy, said his driver. We're needed back on the branch. Boko was soon trundling down the main line, when suddenly there was a loud rumbling sound, and a large mound of earth slid onto the line, blocking all the tracks. Goodness, cried Boko, stopping with his buffers nuzzled in the landslide. That's Donald and Douglas, cried Boko. Thinking fast, the diesel revved his engine and huge clouds of exhaust billowed into the sky. Stop! Stop! He called, his horn blaring loudly. The twins heard the horn, but were more alarmed by the large plumes of smoke. It must be a fire! We'd better help! cried Donald. The twins braked hard, and the train came to a stop just before the landslide. On the other side, Boko sighed thankfully. The Fat Controller came to inspect the damage. Thank goodness you all are safe, he sighed. Well, sir, said Donald. You've Boko to thank for that. Boko blushed. I was just trying to save a fellow engine, sir, and explained his smoke signal. The Fat Controller was most impressed. Soon the line was cleared. As the twins left, Boko could hear Douglas quietly say, You know, don't know, for the diesel on Boko's not such a bad sort of engine. And for Boko, that was all he needed to know. He had been a really useful engine.
It was always said of Henrietta that she might be useful one day. Toby is certain of it and never leaves her behind. The two of them are attached and always joke. We know each other better than we know ourselves. That is why, one day, Toby knew that something was wrong. Is something troubling you? He asked kindly. Don't misunderstand me, but it feels as though we're on our old line. Whatever do you mean? Well, ever since Daisy arrived, there's been no need for us on the passenger service. I'm very grateful to Sir Topham Hatt for bringing us here, but I long to be useful and full outside of the quarry run. Henrietta looked down at her buffers. Our line closed when passengers stopped riding with us. I'm worried that may happen again. Don't worry, he comforted. I'll make sure nothing like our old line happens again. Certainly not being turned into a hen house anyway. Do you promise? I promise, Toby said finally. That made it all right, and Henrietta felt better. They arranged their trucks and were soon ready to leave for the harbor. As Toby ran alongside the river, a little lorry overtook them. It gave a quick and zoomed away. Henrietta sighed. "Chin up," said Toby. "Don't let them get you down. You never know when you'll be glad you came along." "You're right," Henrietta smiled. "After all, where would you be without me?" Toby smiled back knowingly. They reached a nearby station, and Toby stopped for a drink, when suddenly the station master ran up, with a frantic-looking man in tow. "This man's lorry is overheated in town, and needs to deliver his goods to the junction. Do you think you can help?" "Of course," Toby's driver replied. "We'll take it in Henrietta." The old coach was excited, but not when she saw what the lorry was carrying. "Toby, you promised," she wailed. Toby chuckled. I know. But remember our old line? You always wanted to take traffic away from the roads." Henrietta wasn't amused, but relented as the last chicken cage was safely stored on her floorboards. The trip wasn't all plain sailing. The chickens flapped, squawked, and thrashed in their cages. Henrietta was glad when it was nearly finished. Leaving their trucks at the harbor, Toby quickly made a dash for the junction, where the chickens were offloaded to wait for Edward. The driver and fireman helped the guards sweep and clean Henrietta's floorboards and cushions. They cleaned her so well, you'd hardly suspect she'd been anything but a coach. When Edward was out of sight, Toby rang his bell goodbye, and the two returned back to the harbor. "So," Toby asked, "how did you enjoy being useful once again?" "I suppose you really never do know when you'll come in handy," she began. "But for now, I think I'll be content with our runs to the quarry." Toby chuckled as they arranged their empty trucks and headed off to collect the workmen for the trip home.
One day, Edward stopped outside the vicarage orchard. Trevor was resting in his shed, looking rather unwell.
"Goodness,"
said Edward, concerned.
"You've certainly seen better days." I can't breathe properly,"
wheezed Trevor.
"Mr. Cole says I need a new boiler, but the vicar can't afford it." "What a shame," sympathized Edward. "Is there any way I can help?" "Oh, thank you, Edward. But please don't bother yourself. I'll be fine, I promise."
But Edward wasn't so sure. He puffed away with much on his mind. At the station, Edward explained the situation to Boko.
"I'm worried,"
he sighed.
"I've never seen Trevor in such a state."
Boko pondered the problem. "Perhaps you could have a fun run," he suggested. "My drivers participated in quite a few. They can bring in quite a few donations."
"That's it!"
cried Edward excitedly. Later that day, he spoke to the fat controller about it.
"A splendid idea,"
he smiled.
"I'll start making the arrangements straight away."
As the fat controller walked into his office, Edward couldn't help but feel hopeful. Early that morning, Edward arrived at Arlesburg West for his non-stop run to Vickerstown. A line of coaches and a spare water tanker were waiting for him at the platform. As his driver fastened a hose from the tanker to Edward's tender, excited passengers crowded around, eager to participate in the fun run. The guard barely had enough tickets to go around. Soon, everything was ready. With a determined whistle, Edward slowly pulled out of the station, beginning the first stage of his long trek. Edward was making good progress as he arrived at the big station. People and engines cheered and whistled as he passed by. At the next station, he slowed so his crew could pick up buckets of coal on the platform. "Good luck, Edward," called Thomas, waiting nearby. Feeling encouraged, Edward picked up speed and soon was speeding along in fine style.
This is lovely, he thought. At this rate, I'll reach the end of the line in no time.
But he'd reckoned this without the hill. As Edward began the climb, he felt the weight of the coaches pull against his coupling. He hadn't been expecting so many passengers, and now he was struggling to get over the hill.
"I will do it! I will do it!"
he panted as he inched his way up. He did it at last and coasted down without further effort. "You used quite a lot of water back there," said his driver, concerned. "I'm not sure we have enough for the rest of the journey."
"We'll have to make do,"
said Edward determinedly. For the first few stations afterwards, everything went well. But as they passed the workstation, Edward's tank was quickly running dry.
"Nothing left in the water tanker," said the fireman, "and we can't just stop for more."
Edward soldered on, but he was beginning to feel hot and bothered.
"I must do it! I must do it!"
he puffed wearily. As he struggled to a tunnel, Gordon approached on the express line.
"Keep it up, my dear Edward," he called. "You can do it!"
With newfound confidence, Edward pressed on through the tunnel and on to Vickerstown. At last, Edward could see Vickerstown in the distance.
"Nearly there! Nearly there!"
he gasped, but by now his tank was completely empty. Thinking quickly, his crew damped down his fire, and Edward was able to struggle on just a bit further until he finally ran out of steam, right at the station platform. The passengers erupted out of the coaches and cheered Edward to the heavens. The Fat Controller was there too, and congratulated Edward on his fine performance. Edward had no steam to reply, but managed to give a thankful, relieved smile. The fun run was a great success, and a few weeks later, when Edward passed the vicarage orchard again, he saw Trevor happily basking in the warm sun.
"Lovely seeing you again," he smiled. "How are you feeling?"
"Better than new,"
said Trevor with youthful vigor.
"I'm most grateful, Edward. The vicar says you're what your controller calls really useful."
Edward was flattered.
"Oh, I wouldn't say that," he said. "Just helping a friend is all."
With that, he continued on his way as Trevor gave a cheerful whistle in farewell. Mrs. Kindley's cottage sits on a hill overlooking Thomas's branch line. The engines whistle happily to her as she waves from the upstairs window. She has been a friend to the railway for many years, and the engines loved her very much. One day, Toby stopped at a signal near the cottage. Mrs. Kindley was tending to her garden. Toby gave her a cheerful ding-ding on his bell.
"Hello, Toby,"
she said.
"It is good to see you."
"What are you doing?" Toby asked.
"I'm digging up my old flowers,"
she replied.
"The ones from last season have died."
"Ah, flowers are delicate things," said Toby. "You get new flowers, but they never can replace the beauty of what came before."
"I couldn't agree more,"
smiled Mrs. Kindley.
"I just wish I could keep the cottage looking as good as my flowers. At this age, it's hard to keep up with it all. Toby, do you have time to take me into town to buy new flowers? I must get groceries, too."
"Of course," Toby said. And as the signal dropped, he and Mrs. Kindley left for the next station. At the junction, Mrs. Kindley thanked Toby and walked slowly away. Toby was sad to see that it was becoming harder and harder for her to do the things she once was able to do. Toby became pensive about this and told the others later that day.
She's getting old,
Thomas sighed.
I do wish there was a way we could make things easier for her.
What if we make deliveries? I can ask the foreman to load anything she needs into my vans,
Percy said cheerfully.
And I can bring her friends to visit her in Henrietta,
Toby added.
That's settled then,
Thomas smiled.
If we all pitch in wherever we can make a big difference for Mrs. Kindley.
The engines were as good as their word, making a special stop each day at Mrs. Kindley's cottage to bring much-needed food and fellowship. Thomas's driver and firemen helped her plant her new flowers, and neighbors helped clean the cottage from top to bottom. Soon it looked better than ever before, and Mrs. Kindley thanked the engines, their drivers, and all of her friends for their hard work.
It makes an old woman smile to have such wonderful friends,
she said. Thomas, Percy, and Toby all beamed. Over the next few weeks, the engines didn't see Mrs. Kindley as much. They made their deliveries, but men and women that the engines hadn't met before came to receive them. They weren't neighbors or friends. One day, Toby thought to ask one of these men. "We're part of Mrs. Kindley's hospice team," he said. Toby gave a pained look. He knew what that meant.
"Is she very ill?"
Toby asked, sadly. "I'm afraid so. We're taking good care of her," said the man. "She's comfortable. She asks about you and the others." Toby smiled.
"Please tell her that we are thinking of her and love her very much."
"I will," he said, and walked up to the cottage. Toby told the others the sad news.
It's a shame. She was always there for us over the years, and now she's helpless.
"At least we were able to give her one last gift,"
Thomas said.
"Her cottage is beautiful, and her flowers are beginning to bloom."
The three engines sighed and sat in silence for some time, thinking about Mrs. Kindley. One day shortly thereafter, Toby stopped at the cottage, hoping to speak to one of the nurses again, but found only a short man in a black suit. "Hello," he said. "While we appreciate your deliveries, we are no longer accepting them due to Mrs. Kindley's passing." Toby's heart sank.
"When did it happen?"
Toby asked mournfully. "Last night. She passed away peacefully." The man turned and left Toby alone at the signal. Toby looked up and saw the blooms. Vibrant reds, blues, and yellows sparkled in the sunshine.
"They're beautiful, but can never replace what came before,"
Toby said to himself, thinking of his friend Mrs. Kindley. But no matter how sad he felt, the new life blossoming at the cottage reminded him that Mrs. Kindley was still there.
"Goodbye, Mrs. Kindley."